All right, so let's start this broadcast with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. The Russia-Ukraine war is escalating and so are the casualties on both sides. The figure has now reached a staggering 500,000. The ongoing war is the bloodiest since the Vietnam War in the 1950s, despite the West pledging weapons worth billions of dollars to Ukraine. Its counteroffensive is yet to achieve any kind of breakthrough, given Russia's air superiority and the multi-layered defense line that Ukraine is having a hard time to gain back the lost territories. Now, Russia earlier said that its forces had shot down a Ukrainian Su-25 fighter jet, while Moscow has said that it has repelled a Ukrainian offensive in Kupiansk, and also in places such as Krasny Lyman, in Donetsk and other directions. This brings us to the point as to why Ukrainians are in urgent need of the F-16 fighter jets, which Washington has assured will arrive as soon as pilot training is completed. So let's try and understand as to why Ukraine needs the F-16 fighter jets, which is a fourth-generation multi-role aircraft, so badly. At the heart of their dire need lies the Ukrainian inability to detect Russian missiles and bombs until it's too late. The Ukrainian radar systems provide some warning, but the eventual target is often obliterated without notice. See, time and area both are in favor of Russia. They've had ample time to prepare the ground with minefields, and Ukraine delayed the counteroffensive by a long time. F-16s will allow the Russian jets to fire missiles from a distance to be intercepted or challenged. It will also help attack Russian helicopters targeting Ukrainian tanks and armored vehicles. The F-16s with updated software will also enable Ukraine to employ US-made missiles more effectively along with other weapons. And more importantly, the F-16's air-to-air capability will help those ground-based defenses last longer. And the Ukrainian defense minister has even said that the F-16s could play a crucial role in getting the Crimean Peninsula back. Now, despite Ukraine's promises, even the training is yet to begin. Ukraine has in fact got Soviet-era MiG and Sukhoi fighter jets, but clearly it needs more weapons. Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is currently in Sweden to discuss the military support for the country. Sweden has been aiding Ukraine's war efforts by supplying weapons such as tanks, anti-aircraft systems and also armored Type 90 infantry fighting vehicles. The latest to join the list could of course be the Gripen fighter jets.
Говорили і про іншу сильну шведську машину, літаки Гріпен. Це гордість Швеції. І я впевнений, що Гріпени можуть зробити нашу свободу значно більш захищеною. Тестові випробування Гріпенів за участі українців, наших пілотів, вже почались.
Now, to give us more perspective on this issue, we're being joined by retired Colonel Rich Alton, who's a senior fellow of the Atlantic Council and also the Jamestown Foundation, is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Sir, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on WION. Now, a lot has been said as to why Ukraine requires the F-16 fighter jets, but realistically speaking, what impact do you think the F-16 fighter jets can have in the course of this war?
Well, it's good to be with you. Thanks for having me. The upshot of this, of course, is that it will take some time. The F-16 is a complicated piece of equipment, so the training of the pilots is going to take some time. It's not going to be a matter of weeks, but months, several months, to get pilots, even skilled and experienced pilots, ready to fly these aircraft once they are available. But as to what will happen once they can do that, once they're in the air, it's best to conceive of it in three pieces. The first is in air-to-air combat, so the combat between some of these more advanced Russian fighters and the Ukrainian fighters. The Ukrainians generally have older and slower aircraft right now than do the Russians. The F-16s will allow the Ukrainian pilots to see further and to fire faster in air-to-air combat, and that gives what's called air superiority. And that's incredibly important because it leads to the second piece of this, which is the ability for Ukrainians to hit in Russian territory or in occupied Ukraine launch sites for Russian drones, Russian missiles, and Russian aircraft. So right now, all of those things, the aircraft, the drones, and the missiles can be fired from Russia or from Russian-occupied Ukrainian territory. The Ukrainians can't see it in time and they can't stop it. So their troops on the ground are getting hammered by the Russians because they don't have air superiority. The third part of this then is that once Ukraine can strike those sites, it will become much more difficult for Russia to batter the Ukrainian ground forces with those drones and missiles and aircraft, manned aircraft. Once that happens, this counteroffensive and Ukraine's position on the ground in general would be much more favorable, and
Right.
we may see some progress towards the end of that war.
Now, Colonel Alston, for several months, the strategy that had been talked about that Ukraine had been employing is that of air denial for the Russians, because the Ukrainians were given these anti-air defense missile systems, like, for instance, the Patriot missile defense system, the IRIS-T systems, etc., which made it virtually impossible for the Russian fighter jets to gain any kind of play over the Ukrainian airspace. Are we to now say that that strategy has not yielded the results that were being hoped for?
Well, it's a matter of degree. I think that protecting the forces from direct visual range attack, that's worked. I mean, certainly for the Ukrainian forces and for Ukrainian cities, they are less vulnerable because of these systems than they were at the beginning of the war. So I think that part is successful. But now we've entered a new phase. And as Ukrainian troops have passed to the counteroffensive, they're a little bit more vulnerable because you're leaving the air defense coverage of some of these systems. So I don't think it's fair to say that that hasn't worked. It's worked for a primarily defensive role. But as Ukraine now moves to the counteroffensive and trying to drive Russia off of its territory, that's not enough.
And also, what sort of an escalation can this lead to? Because what is also being talked about is that Ukraine can use these F-16 fighter jets to carry out attacks inside the Russian territory, or at least in the territory that Russia has annexed from Ukraine. Will this not risk a bigger escalation? And does the West have an appetite for that kind of an escalation?
Well, of course, one of his great cards that he's played throughout this conflict is rattling the saber, saying, I could escalate, this could get worse. But let's look at what he's doing. Let's look at the 500,000 people that have been killed by this conflict already. The man and his military forces, Putin, is launching missiles and the kamikaze drones into civilian apartment buildings. He's already trying to kill all the Ukrainians he can, and he's run out of most of his own weapons, so he's having to buy artillery ammunition and drones from Iran, for instance. So I think the gap between Putin's rhetoric about escalation and the reality of how much further he can escalate is pretty big. Now, if people want to imply that he could go all the way to nuclear escalation, well, I don't think he's willing to do that, especially because the United States has a more sophisticated and updated nuclear arsenal. Nobody really wants to play that game. So I don't think this would lead to much further escalation. It would, in fact, even the playing field.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Colonel Alston, for joining us and getting us all those details there.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.